He's one of the most powerful voices in media. A former stand-up comic, sitcom actor, UFC commentator, and now the face of the world's biggest podcast. Joe Rogan built the Joe Rogan Experience from a scrappy garage project into a platform so influential, Spotify paid $200 million just to host it. But Rogan's path to success isn't clean. It's chaotic, unpredictable, and completely self-made. He was never part of the Hollywood machine. He fought it, reinvented himself, and along the way, broke every rule of traditional broadcasting. From martial arts champ to media disruptor, Rogan didn't just chase success, he built his own world. This is the evolution of Joe Rogan, and the story of how a guy with a mic, a joint, and no filter became a generation's most unlikely voice. Before the podcasts, before the fame, before the $200 million empire, Joe Rogan was just a restless kid from Newark, New Jersey, born into instability. His early life was anything but stable. Born in 1967, Rogan's parents divorced when he was just 5 years old. He remembers almost nothing about that time, except the violence. In rare interviews, he's mentioned witnessing brief flashes of domestic abuse before his father disappeared completely from his life. By the age of 7, Joe and his mother had already relocated twice, first to San Francisco, then to Gainesville, Florida, and eventually to Newton, Massachusetts. Each move meant a new school, new friends, new fights. Rogan has often said he was afraid of becoming a loser, afraid of being weak, and that fear turned into obsession. At 14, he started practicing karate. At 15, taekwondo. Martial arts didn't just give him confidence, they gave him identity. They gave him structure in a world where nothing else stayed in place. By 19, he was the U.S. Open champion in taekwondo. He later became a Massachusetts full-contact state champion 4 years in a row. But the victories came with a cost. The training was brutal, the fights were real, and by 21, Rogan walked away from competition, haunted by chronic headaches and the very real fear of long-term brain damage. He'd pushed his body to the edge, but something deeper had shifted. He knew he couldn't fight forever. Still, the discipline stuck. He carried that same obsession, attention to detail, relentless reps, intensity, into everything that came next, including comedy. Because while Joe Rogan learned how to fight in the ring, his next battle would take place under a spotlight, with nothing but a mic in his hand. In the late 1980s, while training at a taekwondo gym in Boston, Rogan had a habit of cracking jokes during breaks. At 21, Rogan spent 6 months writing, editing, and obsessively preparing for a 5-minute routine. On August 27, 1988, he walked on stage at Stitch's Comedy Club in Boston for his first ever set. No one knew who he was, but by the end of those 5 minutes, he had made his mark. The adrenaline hit him harder than any kick ever had. He was hooked. But comedy didn't pay, especially not at first. To support himself, Rogan juggled jobs, delivering newspapers, teaching martial arts at Boston University, doing construction, driving limos, even helping a private investigator. By night, he honed his voice at comedy clubs, bachelor parties, even strip clubs. Anywhere he could hold a mic. His style? Raw, confrontational, physically expressive, not political, not polished, just unapologetically real. Then came a turning point. A performance at a Boston comedy club caught the eye of talent manager Jeff Sussman. He saw potential, not just in Rogan's jokes, but in his energy, his presence. He offered to manage Rogan, and within a year, the aspiring comic moved to New York City to chase stand-up full-time. In New York City, the grind intensified. Rogan lived with his grandfather to save money, took whatever gigs he could get, and performed every night he could, building his name in smoky clubs and unforgiving rooms. He was obsessed, competitive. He wasn't trying to be funny like someone else. He was trying to build a voice that no one could ignore. By 1994, he moved again, this time to Los Angeles. And in LA, he wouldn't just chase the spotlight, it would finally find him. Joe Rogan didn't move to LA looking for sitcoms, but sitcoms came calling. His edgy, muscular energy stood out. And by 1995, he landed a recurring role on NBC's News Radio, a workplace comedy starring Phil Hartman, Dave Foley, and Andy Dick. Rogan played Joe Gorelli, the station's eccentric, conspiracy theory-loving electrician. The role was written for Ray Romano, but after a shaky rehearsal, Rogan was brought in and never left. For 4 seasons, News Radio gave Rogan national exposure. He worked closely with Phil Hartman, who became both a friend and mentor. But tragedy hit hard in 1998 when Hartman was murdered by his wife in a shocking act of domestic violence. Rogan was devastated. He canceled stand-up dates. He spoke out publicly. It was a moment that reminded him how little control he had over anything except his voice. Even as his profile rose, Rogan wasn't fulfilled. Acting was easy, he said. Too easy. The repetition, the creative limits. It started to feel like a job, not a passion. He kept doing stand-up in the background, but network TV became his main source of income. He once called it a dream gig. But that dream didn't last long. Then came the offer that changed his visibility forever. Fear Factor. In 2001, NBC wanted Rogan to host a new reality show where contestants would eat bugs, face their phobias, and do insane stunts. At first, Rogan thought it was a joke. He nearly turned it down, but his manager convinced him. Do it for the stories, do it for the paycheck, do it for the exposure. Fear Factor was a hit, and so was Rogan. Millions of people watched him every week, smirking as he guided terrified contestants through disgusting, dangerous challenges. But behind the scenes, Rogan didn't love it. He called the show psychological torture and admitted it was creatively empty. Still, the money was real. The fame was growing. And once again, Rogan stayed in something he didn't love, because it opened doors, and the next door would lead him back to his true love, fighting, and a job that finally felt like his own. Long before Joe Rogan was the voice of the Joe Rogan Experience, he was the voice of combat. His obsession with martial arts never left, only evolved. After retiring from competition in his early 20s, Rogan didn't just hang up his GI. He kept training, learning, and studying everything from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to Muay Thai to mixed martial arts, long before it was mainstream. In 1997, he landed a small but important gig, backstage interviewer for a young organization called the UFC. At the time, it was brutal, underfunded, and banned in most US states. Politicians called it human cockfighting. Audiences didn't understand it, but Rogan did. He wasn't just a fan, he spoke the language. He knew the moves, the psychology, the strategy. The early gigs didn't pay enough to cover travel, so Rogan walked away. But in 2002, after the UFC was bought by Zuffa and began to grow under new president Dana White, Rogan was invited back, this time as a color commentator. And he didn't just take the job, he owned it. His commentary style was raw and electric. He combined expert-level knowledge with enthusiasm that pulled in casual viewers. He broke down complex techniques like rear-naked chokes and spinning back kicks in plain language. But he also added color, laughing, shouting, even calling out refs and fighters when needed. He treated UFC broadcasts like fight nights with your smartest, most unfiltered friend. Over time, fans began to associate Rogan's voice with the sport itself. He wasn't just calling the action, he was shaping how people understood it. He trained with elite fighters, rolled with legends like Eddie Bravo and Jean-Jacques Machado, and earned black belts in multiple systems. He wasn't just talking, he could fight. For Rogan, the UFC wasn't just a job, it was personal. It grounded him during the chaos of Fear Factor and gave him credibility far beyond comedy. But it also exposed something deeper, that when Joe Rogan had control over the content and believed in it, he didn't just perform, he thrived. By 2009, Rogan had built a strange resume: comic, actor, fight analyst, reality show host. But none of those roles were entirely him. They were chapters, not identity. What came next would change everything, not just for Rogan, but for digital media itself. It started with a webcam, a laptop, and a stream of stoned rambling between Rogan and his friend Brian Redban. The early episodes of the Joe Rogan Experience were unstructured chaos, long conversations about everything and nothing. Drugs, aliens, stand-up, politics, hunting, simulation theory. No producers, no format, just talking. And people loved it. There was something radically honest about it. In a media landscape full of polished sound bites and tightly scripted interviews, Rogan's podcast felt human. Guests would show up and stay for hours. There was no clock, no commercial break, no agenda. Just curiosity and time. Rogan didn't filter himself. He talked about psychedelics, censorship, the nature of consciousness, the absurdity of fame. He He brought on comedians, fighters, scientists, conspiracy theorists, libertarians, vegans, tech bros, and wellness freaks. He didn't always agree with them. He didn't always push back. But he let them talk. And more importantly, he let audiences listen. By 2012, the podcast had exploded. It wasn't just popular. It was culturally magnetic. Rogan's listeners weren't passive fans. They were disciples. People who felt like they knew him. He wasn't just the host of a show. He was a guide through the modern noise. And he wasn't doing it for legacy media. No cable deal. No studio gatekeepers. He was in control. Just him, the guest, and the mic. What began as a side project was turning into a movement. But Joe Rogan didn't just want a platform. He was about to build an empire. By the mid-2010s, the Joe Rogan Experience wasn't just a podcast. It was a cultural event, airing multiple times a week, clocking in at 2 to 3 hours per episode, with millions of listeners around the world. What set Rogan apart wasn't just the guest list. It was the range. He could interview a fighter about brain trauma one day and host a theoretical physicist discussing dark matter the next. He wasn't afraid to look dumb or to call someone brilliant. The show became a space for unfiltered exploration, and people loved that there were no rules. He gave a platform to rising voices like Jordan Peterson and Lex Fridman. He helped rehabilitate public figures like Mike Tyson. He invited on scientists like Neil deGrasse Tyson, philosophers like Sam Harris, and even politicians like Bernie Sanders. And the episodes weren't 5-minute interviews, they were deep dives. But with influence came pressure. The conversations got bigger, the audience more diverse. And critics began to ask, what happens when an entertainer becomes one of the most powerful voices in the country? Because Rogan wasn't just asking questions anymore. His takes on health, politics, and media were shaping public opinion. For some, he was a dangerous misinformation vector. For others, a free speech hero. And the truth? He was somewhere in between. Open-minded, reckless, brilliant, flawed. Still, one thing was undeniable. Joe Rogan had become a media ecosystem all by himself. Bigger than CNN, bigger than late night, bigger than most entire networks. And that's when the biggest platform in streaming came knocking, with a deal that would make podcast history. In May 2020, Joe Rogan made the biggest business move of his career. He signed an exclusive licensing deal with Spotify. The terms? $100 million, according to early reports. Later disclosures revealed the actual value was over $200 million. It was, at the time, the largest podcast deal in history. For Spotify, it was a power grab, an attempt to dominate podcasting the way Netflix owned streaming. For Rogan, it was a game changer. Overnight, the Joe Rogan Experience became a centerpiece of the Spotify platform. Every episode, past and future, was locked behind their wall. But the deal raised a question. Could the most independent voice in media stay authentic inside a corporate ecosystem? The early signs were mixed. Spotify removed dozens of past episodes from the archive, especially those featuring controversial figures. Listeners noticed. Critics pounced. Had Rogan been censored? Was he being silenced? Or was it just part of playing the big league media game? Rogan responded by saying he still had full creative control. No one told him what to say or who to interview. He even pushed boundaries further, bringing on guests like Elon Musk, Kanye West, and Robert Malone, fueling debates over everything from free speech to pandemic policy. The numbers only grew, but the Spotify deal wasn't just about money. It was about leverage. Rogan had built his brand from the ground up, without traditional media. Now he'd brought a billion-dollar company into his world, not the other way around. Still, the trade-offs were real. Some fans felt alienated. Some saw the move as Rogan selling out. Others celebrated it as the moment podcasting officially dethroned legacy media. But as the audience ballooned, so did the backlash. And the next storm wasn't just about platform. It was about what Rogan was willing to say and who he was willing to give a mic to. By 2021, Joe Rogan was at the height of his influence, arguably the most listened-to voice in the world. But with that reach came a target. And critics had plenty to aim at. The biggest firestorm came during the COVID-19 pandemic. Rogan hosted guests who questioned vaccine efficacy, criticized mandates, and challenged the dominant public health narrative. He famously took ivermectin while recovering from COVID, prompting headlines accusing him of promoting dangerous pseudoscience. The reaction was explosive. CNN, MSNBC, and medical experts slammed him. Artists like Neil Young and Joni Mitchell pulled their music from Spotify in protest. Activists demanded the platform remove his episodes, or his show entirely. Then came a resurfaced compilation, video clips of Rogan using the N-word on past episodes. Out of context, but undeniably uncomfortable. The backlash intensified. Hashtags trended. Op-eds called for deplatforming. Spotify's CEO issued a statement defending Rogan's right to speak, but also apologized for the hurt caused. Rogan responded with a video. He apologized. He said using the word, even in reference, was a mistake. He admitted to poor judgment, but defended his intent. He said he was just a guy trying to learn out loud, not a media outlet trying to shape public policy. The damage was real, but so was the loyalty. Fans didn't abandon him. If anything, the backlash seemed to strengthen his image as a rebel against political correctness. To some, he was reckless. To others, refreshing. And to most, simply unfiltered. But Rogan wasn't trying to be a hero or a villain. He was just being Joe. And somehow, that made him both. In February 2024, Rogan made his biggest post-Spotify move yet. He renewed his deal, but on his terms. The new agreement, valued at $250 million, allowed his podcast to return to platforms like YouTube and Apple Podcasts, no longer exclusive, still platformed by Spotify, but not owned. He had scaled the system and then bent it to fit his style. Now based in Austin, Texas, Rogan operates from a massive compound that includes a state-of-the-art studio, MMA gym, archery range, sensory deprivation tanks, sauna, and cold plunges. It's part fortress, part dojo, part creative sanctuary. He lives the way he works, on his own terms. He still trains daily, still records multiple episodes a week, still surrounds himself with fighters, scientists, comics, and the occasional oddball. And somehow, the audience never stops growing. What makes Joe Rogan different is not his expertise, but his curiosity. He's not the smartest guy in the room. He just asks like he wants to be. That's the draw. He isn't pretending to have the answers. He's trying to find them. In real time, on record. Whether you see him as a free thinker, or a misinformation magnet, a truth seeker, or a dangerous amplifier, his impact is undeniable. He changed how we consume long-form content. He redefined the power of voice. And he proved you don't need Hollywood to build an empire. The legacy of Joe Rogan isn't complete, but one thing's certain. He didn't ride a wave. He built one. Joe Rogan didn't follow the rules. He didn't climb a ladder. He jumped off the roof and built a podcast empire in the air. He's not polished. He's not perfect, but he's real. And in a world full of noise and spin, that's become his superpower. He gave people 3 hours of unscripted talk in an age of 10-second clips. He asked uncomfortable questions when others dodged them. He made his guests comfortable enough to drop the mask. And in doing so, he helped listeners drop theirs too. He's been praised, canceled, defended, boycotted, and platformed more than almost any public figure alive. But through it all, he's stayed the same. A guy with a mic, an open mind, and a seat at the table for anyone willing to sit down and talk. And in today's world, that's not just rare, that's revolutionary.